Hello and welcome to Best Binocular Reviews. My name is Jason. In this video, I'm going to answer the question as to whether buying an out-of-stock or older pair of binoculars is a good idea, discuss as to how fast the technology in binoculars progresses, and thus whether an older pair of binoculars may still be relevant today, and then lastly, just comment as to whether this may actually be a good way to save some money. And we're going to start right now. So this video comes as a result of a question sent in to me by Jasik, who had just read my review of these Vanguard Endeavor ED binoculars that I wrote a full 7 years ago now. And thus they were justifiably wondering as to whether these binoculars are still relevant today and thus whether they should still consider buying them. So firstly, thanks very much for your question, and the fact that I still have the binoculars perfectly preserved in the box here, along with a few other of my personal pairs, which are even older than that, I feel makes for some really good real-world examples with which we can base our answer on. So firstly, I think it is important to understand that when it comes to the technology of optics and binoculars, the rate at which it advances is far, far slower than what you would see with an electronic or mechanical device. So especially things like mobile phones or cameras, for example, spring to mind. The rate that technology keeps on progressing is so fast that you almost have to buy a new version at least every year or every other year to keep up. So with optics, it is far, far slower than this. And therefore, a really good set of binoculars, and I'm talking a nice high quality, high performance binocular that you bought maybe 10, 12, 15, or even 20 or even more years ago, in my eyes at least, would still be considered a really good and high performance binocular today. It may not look quite as modern and it may have some features that are missing, but in general, the level of optics will not be far different, if at all different, to an equivalent binocular today. On top of this, with many mechanical and electronic devices, you will see a drop in performance over time. So for example, if we take a computer, when you first get it, it runs really fast and smoothly out of the box. But then gradually over time, it slowly gets slower and slower and slower until it grinds to a halt. With binoculars, this is not at all the case. So as long as you buy a good quality set in the beginning, and I do emphasize good quality, over time, so long as you look after them, the drop in performance will be very minimal and in some cases not at all. So for us, the consumer, this is obviously great news, as it means we don't have to go out every few years and update our binoculars. However, for the manufacturers, this is not so great. I mean, on the one hand, they really want to produce a well-made, long-lasting binocular, just so that they entice you to buy it in the first place. But on the other hand, they would love for you to come back every few years and buy a new, upgraded model. So some brands will make fairly regular updates to some of the models within their stable. Now, many of the times, these updates are little more than cosmetic changes and maybe there to keep up with the latest trend in design and etc. like that. Then on other occasions, there will be some improvements to minor things like, so for instance, some of the accessories like the carry case or the neck strap, for example. And then finally, on some occasions, what manufacturers or brands will do is they will make real world differences to the actual binocular, be that improvements in the actual chassis and what materials are used on the outside or for the focus wheel, for example, or they will improve the level of optics on the actual binocular. So either change the glass supplier or the type of glass used or the actual coatings on the actual binocular itself. If we take a look at these Vanguard Endeavor ED binoculars as an example, since I reviewed them about 7 years ago now, Vanguard has updated them on a number of occasions. Firstly, they introduced the Endeavor ED2 series, which had a few aesthetic changes to be sure, but more importantly, they also included a number of improvements to the actual optics themselves. So for example, they changed to Hoya glass made in Japan. And since then, they have made further changes, and there are even newer versions still. But I think the main point I wanted to get across here is that yes, the newer ED2 version is actually an improvement on the original. But this is not to say that the older version has suddenly become bad or that it is suddenly no longer relevant. Indeed, the optics that they used then are still used on many binoculars today. So in this example, yes, there's no doubt that the newer versions are certainly an improvement on the original. But having said that, they should almost be considered as an entirely new binocular, and indeed they are far more expensive than these are or indeed ever were. So if we go back to the original and compare them like for like with other optics with the other binoculars, with the same level of optics, these I still believe compare very well, and therefore because it's an older model that is no longer in production, as so long as you can find them, which requires a bit of effort in itself, but if you can find them, there are certainly some substantial savings to be made. If we quickly take a look at another example, these compact Steiner Wildlife binoculars were actually the very first binoculars that I ever purchased. And so that was about, I don't want to give away too much, but about 20 years ago now. So whilst they were never the most expensive binoculars to start off with, they have a couple of features that I really do like. So for instance, this double hinge design is something that allows them to fold up really into a small shape. And because of that, I find that I use these binoculars almost more than any other binocular that I have, because there are many occasions when I'm going out and I just quickly grab a pair of binoculars, and I don't want to have the added hassle of having a heavier pair of binoculars. So invariably I just grab this pair of binoculars with me, and they travel just about almost everywhere I go. So because of that, they are a little bit beat up, but having said that, they have lasted incredibly well. So to start off with, whilst they weren't an expensive pair of binoculars to begin with, they were well made. As you can see, the outer casing is still, whilst not as shiny or as bright as it once was, it's still lasting extremely well. The rubber hasn't gone soft or tacky, as you sometimes find happens on cheaper binoculars. But on top of that, the optics, whilst they were never brilliant to start off with, and this is a compact binocular, which means it's never going to perform quite as well as a larger instrument. I wouldn't say that in terms of their performance, they are any different from when I first got them, nor indeed are they any worse than any other compact of the same level that you can get today. Another interesting example I have for you is with the Vortex Razor series. Back in 2012, I was one of the first people to get to test and review this binocular. Indeed, I say this because I don't know if you can see, but the serial number on this binocular is 10. Now, considering that they still make it today, to have the 10th one to come off the production line, it feels quite nice. Anyway, back in 2012, they arrived on my desk and I immediately thought this was an excellent pair of binoculars. Considering, they're not cheap, but compared to some of the alpha level binoculars, they are quite a lot less expensive. Yet performance-wise, I was super impressed. Indeed, they went on to win the award for the best binocular of that year. And on top of that, I like them so much that I decided to buy them and keep them for myself. And since that day, I've used them a lot. Out of all the binoculars that I have, full-size binoculars, discounting the compact binocular, if I'm looking for a performance binocular and prepared to carry about a bit more weight, or I'm looking for a low-light binocular, in an 8x42 configuration, in my opinion, this is the best general use binocular or configuration out there. And so invariably, when I'm going out and I'm not testing a binocular, I'm taking my own pair with me, this is the one that comes with me. So I can definitely vouch for its longevity because it's seen a lot of action and it still looks pretty good. You can see some of the rubber out there is sort of getting discolored. Perhaps I should clean it a bit better, but in my eyes, I look after it. And in terms of the optics and the quality of the view, I would say it's no different than the day I got it. So if we go back to the original question in that, if you were to buy a brand new set today, would they be still relevant right now? Absolutely. This is still a fantastic pair of binoculars and competes very well with other binoculars like for like. So why has it changed then? So, well, Vortex brought out the new set in 2020, earlier of this year. And once again, I happen to be one of the lucky first people to test this instrument. As you can see, it's quite a lot different. Both 42mm binoculars, but as you can see, this one's quite a lot taller, and you can't see, but I can feel it. It's quite a lot heavier. And this is because they've completely changed the optics inside them, and it uses actually a different design of roost prism. So, a bit like the Vanguard example, these should be looked at as different binoculars now. And indeed, Vortex themselves, they've changed the name slightly. So it's the Razor UHD compared to the HD. And Vortex still produces both models, side by side. So you can purchase one or the other. This is also quite a lot more expensive than the HD now. So going back to the original question once again, yes, this is still, even I think, I'm pretty sure that Vortex has slightly updated the models that they produce now. But even if you were to get this exact one made in 2012, I would say that you would be extremely happy with it, and you'd be hard pressed to notice any difference between an equal quality binocular that's produced tomorrow or yesterday, for example. So what can we take away from this? Well, personally, in most cases, I would probably still advise that you buy a current binocular. That way you're just future-proofing yourself just that little bit more. But having said that, should you stumble across a binocular that you really like the look of, a good quality binocular that you like the look of, and it just happens to be one that's no longer in production or a few years old, an older model or whatever, then I definitely wouldn't be afraid or worried that so long, and I go back to the fact that it's a good quality binocular, I wouldn't be worried that the level of optics or its performance won't be able to compete with a similar level binocular made a current level binocular. Also, in most cases, I would generally advise not buying second-hand binoculars. That is, unless you are specifically buying a vintage binocular, and in which case it's invariably going to be second-hand, unless you're extremely lucky, or you trust the seller who's they've looked after the binocular in a manner that you would expect. And I would also make sure that you have an agreement with them that should it arrive and they haven't arrived as you expected them to be, that you can send them back with no questions asked. So there you have it. I do hope that this video has been both informative as well as interesting. If it has, I would really appreciate a thumbs up. Furthermore, if you have any questions or comments or ideas for future videos, please feel free to use the section down below and I'll do my very best to get back to you. On top of this, if you found this video enjoyable and you would like to see some more of them, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to my channel, as this really does help. So I will leave it there and I'll say thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Cheers for now.